On July 27, 2019, I was driving back home to the Chicago area from western Missouri after participating in the 52nd annual meet of the Wheelman organization. I have a separate video on that. On the way down there, I passed through St. Louis and stopped at the Gateway Arch, and I have a video on that. On the way back, I stopped at the National Museum of Transportation on the west end of St. Louis, and I have a video on that. There was one other thing I wanted to do, and had been wanting to do for many years, and I decided to do it on this trip after visiting the National Museum of Transportation, and that is to do sort of an impromptu nostalgia tour of several places in St. Clair County, Illinois. This is a county I've lived in twice in my life, once as a child and once as an adult. And I hadn't been back there in ages, not since the, when would it have been? Like 1977 or thereabouts, really. Other than just driving through St. Louis, I hadn't really been into St. Clair County. And I wanted to see some places where I'd gone to school as a child, or worked as an adult, or lived. And so I decided to get off the highway. Now here's a map of St. Clair County highlighted. You can see where St. Louis is, and it pretty much picks up on the Illinois side of the Mississippi River, goes straight east, out past the town of New Baden, and down past Mascoutah, and down here past New Athens, and coming back up past Waterloo and Columbia, and back to the river. So it encapsulates this whole area. Smack in the middle of St. Clair County is Belleville, and I did go to school there briefly as an adult. I took a couple semesters at what used to be Belleville Area College and is now Southwestern Illinois University or something like that, or it's a bigger school, much bigger school than it used to be. So the reason I lived there was, as a child, we just moved. We'd lived in Japan for quite a while, and we'd moved back to the States. My dad was in the Air Force, and we were stationed at Scott Air Force Base, which is just on the east side of Belleville here, and or sort of in between Belleville and Mascoutah here. And that was just for a couple of years, but I did go to school there, grade school and junior high, both. And then we moved to Europe and stayed in Europe until I was an adult and had already completed a good part of, well, not a good part, but I was well into college. And this is on account of the high school that was provided by the U.S. government. It was also a satellite college for the University of Maryland, so you could go to college there. And I was into college classes for about a year before we moved back to the States, after which I lived in Wisconsin for a summer and then came down here to St. Clair County. And as an adult, I was working and going to school, and I lived in both a housing area on Scott Air Force Base briefly, and then in the town of Mascoutah here for a while, and eventually I moved away and came to the Chicago area, where I've lived ever since. But I have a lot of memories of this area, and I wanted to see how things had changed, if I could still find some of the places. And so that's the purpose of this video. I'm making it partially for members of my family to enjoy, but also it occurs to me that some things in this video will have nostalgic value to other people who have lived in the area, and it might strike a chord with some people. So I'm going to be posting it here on YouTube, and if people are interested in it, great. If it does nothing for them, they can not watch it. So here's a Google Maps aerial view of St. Louis and St. Clair County off to the right. And I came down here from the Kirkwood area where my mouse is waggling around there, and that's close to where the National Museum of Transportation is. So I'd just gotten on Interstate 270 here and came down and crossed the Mississippi, and then 270, and then to 255, which goes up along this way. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit. 255 comes up here and comes close to I-64 at this interchange, and I came back this way, got off at this interchange, which is what is it, Kings Highway, where the mouse is moving there. Just a short way to pick up this curvy road here, which is St Clair Avenue. Now, a job I had part-time while I was going to college was at a place run by a fellow named Sidney Franklin. And I don't remember what the name of the business was anymore, but it was located right here in the middle of the picture on the north side of St. Clair Avenue and surrounded by cornfields. And St. Clair Avenue here is a 4-lane highway with a railroad track running on the south side of it. Back in that time, the railroad track was at grade level, and so it was the same level as the highway. And one thing I remembered was that there was only one road for quite a distance that crossed the railroad tracks, and so it was just a set of crossing gates that came down, and then it went south. And as you can see here, there's now this rather large housing area, which seems to be called Woodcrest, or I always thought it was East St. Louis. I'm not sure if that's the Woodcrest neighborhood or Woodcrest is a separate town. There's also Signal Hill down here. So I'm not really sure what this neighborhood is called, what town it falls under. But let's just say for the moment that it's on the outskirts of East St. Louis. So anyway, I knew that there was this one road crossing, and I was looking for that. Nowadays, they've raised up the rails for some distance on either side of this road, and it's now an overpass. And I presume that's because that's the only road that could serve emergency vehicles and so on into this huge housing area if coming from the north. And they probably decided that long freight trains along here blocking that for long periods wasn't such a good thing. I don't know when they built this overpass, but it was not there when I worked there in the around 1977-ish. Anyway, so I was trying to find the mobile home place, and that's what Sidney Franklin's business did, is it was a mobile home enterprise. I think he used to tell me it was the biggest mobile home business in the Tri-County area. And we certainly did a lot of work all over in eastern Missouri and southwestern Illinois. Anyway, so not to belabor it too much, this was my point to focus on when I came down St. Clair Avenue, trying to find what was left of the business, because I could certainly see no mobile homes. But there was a building that Franklin had, and it was more like a garage with a couple of bays in it, which you can see there. And we kept a tractor in there and a truck for pulling mobile homes, and then it was mostly a warehouse and storage space. And I don't believe this building was there. Instead, sitting out here where I'm moving the mouse around was a mobile home, and that was the business office, as I recall. And immediately to the west of that building, I used to park my car right down here, just before the ditch separating the business area from the highway. And my recollection is that there was a new mobile home dealership. Not a huge one perhaps, but it was just to the west here of this building. So I think it must have been in this area. It was gravel paved, as I recall. I don't think it was concrete or asphalt, but this business here that's called Paducah Roofing, or Rigging, I'm sorry. I don't know how old that is. And actually, it doesn't look all that different either, but it also has 2 garage entrances in it, and it's possible this could have been the building instead of this one. I really can't tell. Either one has garage bays in it, but I'm going to say that I think it was this one, or maybe there was an older building here. Anyway, somewhere in this general area was the building, and that was the base of operations for hauling mobile homes around. And just to the west of it was a deeper than it is wide, so it went more this way than it went this way. I think it was only like 2 mobile homes wide with a road between them, and there was a bunch of mobile homes there that you could come and buy, and it was kind of like a showroom. You just came in and stepped into the different mobile homes and you could see what they were like. So that was the one business. There was, I think it was right about here, somewhere in this area where I'm moving the mouse, was an area where we would take apart mobile homes. If we picked up a mobile home that had burned, for example, or been damaged in some way, we would be hired to pull it back and tear it apart down to the frame and, you know, either recycle the components or repair it or do various things. So it was that kind of business, delivering mobile homes. It even got hired by banks sometimes to pick up mobile homes from various mobile home parks if the people who had been had mortgaged a mobile home and then weren't paying the mortgage and had already left and moved on. Somebody would have to come collect the mobile home and bring it back here, clean it up so it could be resold. We used to call ourselves repo men, but it wasn't really that dramatic. It was mostly just going and picking up vacant mobile homes. But I still consider it was the worst job I ever had. But I can tell it's the right area because there was also another mobile home park for newer mobile homes that people would own and bring here and rent spaces, concrete pads to put their mobile homes on. It was a nice small mobile home park. And it was, I think it was next to the business, which is why I think this building here is probably the building and this is probably newer. I think this whole area here was the mobile home park. And just, the pads are still left out here behind Visa Sewer of Missouri. And this building does look newer, so I'm sticking to my claim that this was probably the building that was the operational center, and maybe it was here instead, but in any case, new mobile home park here. Now, when I was there, in reality, it did not look exactly like this. Instead, in this area, I believe there was a big fenced area that looked like it was a lot for maybe a power company or something. So I think this photo on Google Earth is old and does not reflect what it actually looks like now. I think this, at least this space here, is some sort of a storage area that's all fenced in instead of being trees and unoccupied like it looks there. Now, Franklin also had property that included an old mobile home park where my understanding was he owned all the mobile homes. They were the older kind, single wide, not very long, kind of the type of thing you might see in Michael Madsen's character Bud in Kill Bill or something like that. The kind that has a disreputable reputation now, but at one time was a perfectly normal mobile home. And there was this park that was, again, not so wide but rather deep, where there were more mature trees and these smaller mobile homes, and he was renting them out to itinerant construction workers and so on, who were, moving around the country, being at a certain place for several months or a year, and they would get a little more freedom than, say, staying in a long-term hotel or something. It would be more like having their own house. So he rented them out, and my actual job was as a plumber. He wanted somebody who could take care of all the plumbing issues with all the mobile homes in that part of his business. But then it turned out there weren't that many requirements to keep me busy, so he just sort of integrated me into the mobile home transportation part of his business, and I was just sort of a jack of all trades and did whatever he asked me, basically. But anyway, so zooming out here, you could see this property goes back, and that was my recollection, that it went way back, and you can still see the remnants of the concrete pads that the mobile homes were on. And that is my recollection of how it looked. Now, I don't know if this is still a going concern or not. These photos are old. When I went there to visit, I came down this frontage road here, which was the only entrance I knew about and could remember into this place. Although, honestly, I recall that there was also a direct way to get from there to the highway. So I think they may have removed a crossover over the ditch. So this is a lot of rambling, but I did drive back in here briefly, and the road kind of curved around like this. It may have actually been this road, so I think it just kind of came like this. And there were a couple of mobile homes in there and a couple of cars. There were also a couple of burned out hulks of mobile homes. And it just had the look of a place where probably people didn't really want me poking around, so I just went through real quickly and didn't spend a lot of time. I possibly could have gone back and looked further into here. Maybe that was, more run down or less run down, or maybe just, I don't know. I don't know the status of this, who owns it, if I was trespassing or anything. So anyway, this whole part of the video that's going to come up next, after all my rambling here, for orientation purposes, is going to be me trying to find this place and sticking my nose in very briefly. Again, I'm not really making this for a general YouTube audience, so pardon the long-winded nature of this. But then I was remembering also that there was another mobile home park just a little bit further to the east. So here's the one of them, and then down here is another one, which is also older, has a lot of empty pads, but also has the older style mobile homes in it, looks like. So this may in fact have been, this may be the location of the one with the itinerant workers in it, but I remember it going back a bit further. So, maybe at one point it went further up here and since has been returned to farmland. Can't recall. And this area here may actually have been part of the newer mobile home park that I cited this as being part of it, but that may, I recall it went back quite a ways, so maybe it was this whole area was the new mobile home park. Really can't be sure anymore. But if that was the case, then I would want to lean on this being the building. But then I also remember that there were some mobile homes right behind the building, so this may still be the building. It's really hard to figure out. But I'm going to expand this now to say that this whole area, from this mobile home park across to this one, one or both of these buildings would be the area of interest. So that back there was, I think, the remnants of the mobile home park that Sidney Franklin owned, and that he owned the mobile homes there too, and let them out to transient workers and people who had need of temporary but long-term lodging. And then I think the area right where we are here, possibly even where this storage area is, was quite probably the location of the mobile home park he owned that he let people rent in, and those tended to have much newer, larger mobile homes. It wasn't a super large park, but it went back a ways from the highway. And this place here, I believe this was the location of his lot where we did most of the work, and brought back the brought back the mobile homes that had been repossessed, and it went back into that area there. I don't recall that building there existed. I believe it was not. This fence certainly wasn't here. And there used to be a mobile home parked right here, and that was where the office was for his operation. His mother was the accountant. This building was here. This is the building that he kept a small tractor in for, and the truck when necessary for towing mobile homes. This is where I reported to work every day. And this area right here wasn't grassy then, it was all gravel. This is where I used to park my 1965 Olds F85 station wagon. When I came into work, I just pull in like right here and just park right there next to the ditch. And then the only other business he had was just beyond it in that direction, and that was the new mobile home dealership. Unless it was in that area too. It's too hard to remember exactly. The layout has shifted a little bit. I think that house there was not part of it. So I guess I think he did have his new mobile homes kind of like right back in there. Again, the position of things is a little different than I remember them, but this has got to be the place. Now these train tracks were here before, but they were not raised up. They were right down at grade level. And so it was just a set of tracks going by down at ground level. And then they have since built up this raised area to allow the road to go under the tracks. I think this is pretty much where that Good Works place, that's where his newer mobile home was. Very interesting. So the next stop on this nostalgic trip is to take the route that I used to take from this workplace to either Scott Air Force Base or Mascoutah, the different places I lived. And to do that, I would continue east on St Clair Avenue here. Into the town of Fairview Heights, and then take North Illinois Street past St Clair Square, which is a medium-sized indoor shopping mall. And that was there then, it's still there now. And then get on I-64 and continue along the top side of Belleville. And then past Highway 158, which is Air Mobility Drive here, get off there, and then take this road which is called Wherry Road. That's Wherry, I believe. And it's just south of the interstate there. And at the first time I lived in the Scott area, the interstate didn't exist, but this Wherry Road did. And it would just make a bend here. You can actually see on the map the curvature. The road used to just make a curve here, but at some point they've straightened it out. Probably when they continued Wherry Road over to Choctaw Road, which was just a little dinky dirt road used by farmers, and then Reeder Road came in from the north and intersected there. It was all a very small road, and now it's an interchange for the interstate. And we used to use Reeder Road to get over in the direction of Lebanon, the town of Lebanon, where they had a Dairy Queen. It was the closest place we could find a Dairy Queen when I was a kid. Anyway, so I planned to come here, get off on 158 or Air Mobility Drive, take Wherry Road over, and come in to the north side of Scott Air Force Base here. Although I wouldn't be able to actually get into the base, this remains a civilian area up until this point here, which is the north gate of the base, and probably disused, I figured. Now, to explain a little bit more, here's Scott Air Force Base here, and right next to it is Mid-America Airport, which came along much later. After I lived there the second time. It didn't exist either time I lived there. And this taxiway here between the runways didn't exist. And there's a creek flowing through there, Silver Creek, which they had a little dirt road that went along it. And we used to go biking back there and go fishing and so on as a kid. But anyway, on the east side of the runway here, they had the civilian housing, or not civilian, but the housing area for people who had families. There were higher ranking, you know, like generals and so on had housing over on the west side of the runway, and unmarried airmen also lived there, but people with families, either NCOs or officers, lower ranking officers with families, would live in this housing area called Wherry. And that was, you can see the mouse moving there, it was just this area here. And it had this, of course it's not going to show up very clearly, this gray plaza was the northmost road, and it curved around and went all the way down to the southwest corner. And in those days the only swimming pool was over on the west side of the runway, but they had this road that went all the way around the north side of the runway, and we could bicycle around that way as kids and get to the swimming pool. Anyway, but we actually lived right up here at the very northeastern corner of Gray Plaza and Pryor Drive, which was the north-south road that ran along the eastern side of Wherry. And we were not the first building. There was actually a building right here. These were two-story apartment buildings with either one stairwell or two stairwells per building. So you could have typically 4 families per building for a one stairwell building. So they had one building that was here, and then they had a building that was here, a building that was here, and a building that was here, forming a courtyard in between the 3 buildings. And we actually lived in this building right here. And the Mascoutah school system, which ran the local schools just to the southeast of Scott, built a satellite school and later a second satellite school out here in the cornfields just north of Wary, and they ran a sidewalk up there. In those days there was no security, you could just go right through the gates. And you could see here there is one school, and that was a school I went to at the end of grade school, like 6th grade. And then later on they built a second school. I think it was more like an overflow school. I think one of my sisters went there, but I'm not sure. Anyway, so my goal was to see what had become of these schools. What were they really like? Were they torn down now? These Google Maps sometimes are years out of date. So I figured I could come down Wary Road here and go back up here and check out these schools. And so that's the next step. This area is built up quite a bit more. In those days it was just a highway. I mean, there were some things here and there, but it's improved quite a bit from the way I remember it. It was a lot rougher and more barren out here. So this is the end of St. Clair Street coming in from East St. Louis, and this is the fringe of Belleville, I believe, the northwest corner. Or it may actually be an adjacent town. I'm not really positive of that. But this is North Illinois Street, which is also Highway 159. And this on the left is St Clair Square, which is a shopping mall that was here. I lived here. I'm not sure if they've torn down the original mall. No, it's still back there. I can see it. I didn't go there very much, but I did buy my first digital watch. There wasn't a very big indoor shopping mall, but still. And there was a bank, I think it might even be back in that area. Illini Loan Company or something, and I applied for a job there as a collections phone caller. So I'd call people who were behind on their loan payments, and talk to them. They wanted to hire me because I had a low-pitched, assertive voice. So now this is I-64 heading east. So we've passed O'Fallon, Illinois. And we're still on I-64 heading east. Scott Air Force Base is about 2 miles ahead. Okay, 158. Exit for Scott Air Force Base. Northwest corner of the base. So getting off of 158 onto Wary Road. This is the north-south road that goes along the west side of Scott. There's a deer standing in the road up ahead. So yeah, this is the way we used to come in and out of our housing area, which was Wary housing area. Not much on it. There used to be a few small businesses along here on the right side of the road. One of them was the Thunderbird Inn or something like that. It was really just a place we could go and get pizzas or chocolate shakes, you know, a little place. I think they had a couple of pinball machines and a jukebox. Here, the road used to just bend around to the right. I don't think there was any way to go straight except for maybe a little narrow gravel road going to a farmer's property. Hope this isn't gated off or something. Yeah, now this is something that is new compared to, that's an entrance and exit from I-64. Oh, look at this. The old Wary Road that used to go down here is closed. You can't even go that way. So that is not welcome. They're not going to make it easy to get through there either. Of course, it doesn't look like it's rained much recently, so maybe it won't be too wet. No, it didn't come right here. It turned earlier. So that's the old north gate of the base. Now, I think I can get onto that road back there. That's weird. I didn't see that interchange. So there's where one of the schools was. And the other one had to be right down there somewhere too. Looks badly overgrown. I think before I go walking across this field, I'm going to try to go back and get on that road that runs along there. There's a stop sign up there which indicates it may intersect. So this over here is the top of Wary Road, so I'd gone right past it. Haven't seen anything yet about no point in going further unless you belong on the military base kind of signs. Oh, I see now the old school down there. It's hidden behind the trees. Drive up this way or not, we'll find out. So I got my van parked back there by the north gate. There's nobody manning it. Just has a bunch of barricades and a gate. There's a ditch along here that we used to play in the summer. I seem to have tadpoles and things in it. There was also a walkway just off the road here. I mean, it must have been just like right here in these weeds. This used to seem like quite a long walk when I was a kid, but it's really very close. Somebody's got a tractor parked back here. This looks like the entrance to the first school right here. Can't even see the building hardly. I think the gymnasium was right up here in front. Seems to me I remember getting square dancing lessons in here. Just an impenetrable wall of brush here. Hard to see what's behind it. But this would have been the very front of the school here. There it is. That's got to be the gymnasium. This is the other entrance here, right here. I think the main entrance that I would have used would have been right about here. Well, here's the corner of the building. Well, that's too high. That's the corner of the gymnasium. Right up there. And I think the wing that I had my classes in would have been right about here. And then there was a road that came here, and the playground was right here. Yep, there it is. There's the lower wing right there.
Yeah, this is the old playground. There used to be a big swing set right about here. And this thing, what do they call those now? I think we used to call it chain ball or something like that. You'd have like a volleyball type of thing hanging on this chain, and you'd beat it around in circles. And there was a little basketball area down there. I don't think that stuff has changed at all. Somewhere down here I could probably find the old anchors for the swing set. So I walked back a little bit to make sure that there weren't a bunch of MPs or something around my car, wondering what it was doing parked there outside their gate. Now this whole area here, this was the athletic field. We'd play any field sports out here. And then there was this little road that went around. Not much more than a wide walkway, but cars did sometimes go around if they had to get around the back side of the building. Yeah, so this right here, I mean, that is where the classrooms were. Yep, boarded up windows. Really surprised they haven't just torn these down. Talk about what a couple of decades of disuse will do to a place. Yep. And back here at the corner, there was really nothing behind here except like a football field or something, and then just cornfields after that, going back to where the trees are. Because there is a small creek that goes back through there, and the north runway of Mid-America Airport, or the north end of the runway, is just off here, a very short distance, but of course they hardly have any planes go there anymore. So already I'm back around the corner. Now this school had, as I recall, 2 wings. So this is the area that you could go in to get between the 2 wings of the school. Yep, and this is it. The wings on one side and the wing on the other side. And then just up there is the higher roof of the gymnasium. And I think that was the cafeteria area right here. And then the other wing. I didn't have any classes in this wing. I think it was younger kids. It was a middle school, I think, most recently. But at the time that I went here, it was an elementary school. You know, grades 1 through 6. I have no idea what this is out here. If this is part of another driveway or what. Here's more of the back of that other wing. Well, I would go around that way, but it looks just about impassable without getting all scraped up. So it's about as much as I could hope to see. Now there is this other school back here, but there's just a short distance down here beyond the playground, and there was just a little grassy area, and then the other school. And I honestly don't remember what they used the other school for. I believe one of my sisters went to this other school for maybe a year, and we were always very impressed because it was a brand spanking new building and it seemed huge. Entrance to I-64 is, where I was parked earlier, and I'd walked around to that point of trees to try to scope out the land, get my bearings. Since I don't have any solid memories of this other school, I don't plan to go hanging around here other than just to take a couple of quick snaps from the road. I very much doubt my sister would remember anything about it. She would. Alright. There it is. Also totally overgrown. And that went to a little dirt road. In the distance it went crosswise, and it went off to some guy's farm on the right, probably the guy who farmed here, and then it also went up there and would have intersected with the end of Wherry Road. As I indicated earlier, it was barely a road there. I doubt the guy drove it very much, although it technically may have been the end of his driveway. Some childhood memories fled back that my sister used to call the farmer. We'd see him out farming, and he always had a really deep tan. So did my farmer relatives, for that matter, but we'd see the guy out there farming in these fields, and my sister, pretty young, and she had the opinion that the guy was made out of chocolate, and called him Farmer Chocolate or Mr. Chocolate or something like that. Other memories that come back as I'm out here walking around. There's the radar for the Air Force Base. I seem to remember that's been there just about forever, unless they replaced it with a similar one. But the Wary housing area used to go just along from that gate down there, and the land sloped up a little bit. We used to walk across the street and about 6 apartment buildings down, and the top of the slope behind a friend's house there was very close to where that radar installation was, that radar tower, and so it'd be right behind us, and we'd use that hill for sledding. But we used to make up BS stories, as young kids will, about you know, if you sledded there and you had your sled lined up with the radar just right, it would give you an extra boost down the hill. Chuckle about that thought now, of course, but yeah, I lived here twice. Once as a kid and once as an adult. In the late 60s and the late 70s again. My junior high and high school years and the beginning of college were spent in Europe, but we did return to this base, and only for a very short time, less than a year. Got here, I think, in the summer, early summer, and I actually remained for a year, but only on the base for about half that time. Then I went and lived in a rental in the adjacent town of Mascoutah. And right in this field here is the closest I've come to being in a tornado. I was walking down the little path, and I don't know if it was after school. I think it was in the summer, though. And I used to just go down to the school. My friends and I used to launch, you know, like Estes model rockets and things from the field there, and go ride our bikes down there and so on. Anyway, I recall I was walking along the little path here that the students used from the housing area, and a big old dust devil was coming across the field there, picking up corn stalks. There were some corn stalks and things floating around in it. Of course, it wasn't really a tornado. It was just a normal summer day. There was no storm cloud around or anything. But I wasn't sure at that time that it wasn't a tornado. And it came upon me. I was just kind of dumbfounded watching it, and all of a sudden it was on top of me, and I just sort of cringed and kind of squinted my eyes and just got pelted with corn stalks and dirt that was blowing around in it, sand and dust and so on. And then it was across into this field. Well, so far nobody's come out here to check out the van as far as I can tell. Probably on some sort of camera, though. If they don't have a camera here, I'd be surprised. Now, right over here, where there's this paved area, there used to be a gas station there. I forget which brand, but it would have been like Phillips 66 probably. So it was right at the corner, and it served as kind of a convenience store, especially for the kids. And all the parents used to come out here and get their, bang my knee into the gate. And we'd just walk out here, and they had vending machines. We'd get Cokes and candy bars and so on. And if we wanted to make rubber band guns, we used to go out back of it, and they had old inner tubes, and we'd steal an inner tube and slice it up and to make giant rubber bands for our rubber band guns. These, of course, were like rifle-sized rubber band guns. But that brings back memories too. And they had a gas war going on, But when I was here the first time, and I forget what it was like a quarter per gallon or something, and everybody else was trying to entice people to go to other stations, and these guys here, I seem to recall, they always had the highest prices, but they were the most convenient. I really wonder what they use this old Wary Road for anymore, with the gate there being closed. But the road looks, it doesn't look abandoned, so they must have occasional use for it. Down in the distance I can see I-64. There's a good view of the school right there. Just when you want a big truck to come by, nothing comes by. There we go. So there's I-64. And here's Wary Road. And there's the second school. There's the older school, what you can see of it. And there's the pretty short road going back to the main, or the north gate of the Air Force Base. Yeah, it's 95 degrees here. Nice hot day. I definitely think they rerouted this north end of this road ever so slightly, because it didn't used to make that little swishy curve just before getting up here. It used to make a more gentle curve. So I got to get out of these long pants. And this little stub road here seemed as good a place to change into them as change out of them. Okay, the next thing is I'm going to head over towards Mascoutah, which is the other place I used to live, but I'm right here right now by the end of Wary Road, and I'm going to come back here just a little ways to, well, I think it's County Road 1780. It's also Old Illinois 158. Before they built the newer 4-line 158, and that's just gonna jump down here past the west edge of Scott, and we're gonna come in here. Now this is the current north gate of Scott, and this is the one that people normally use to get in there now, with all the post 9/11 security and everything like that. But I was aware that there was this little Scott Field Heritage Air Park there, and since I do walkthroughs of aircraft museums,
I thought I'd nip in here real quickly and check that out before continuing, but my ultimate goal was to, I can't actually get into Scott, so I'd go back here to 158 or Air Mobility Drive and skirt the west side of Scott. Now, at one point I used to live right here in this house right here on Cedarwood Drive. That's this road. This is a duplex, and we lived in this part of it here, although they've modified it a little bit. This area here on the left used to be a carport, and they've converted all these over to garages at some point since I lived there. And also this extension, this was the living room right here, and the dining room here. I'm sorry, the dining room was here. This was still the carport, but they extended it out. These used to be flat along the back here. At some point they decided they must have wanted to have a little more room, so they added this extension here. So same place, but they've reworked the buildings in the 40 plus years since I was there last. And then of course they didn't have like this whole housing area on the left. This is the Scott Air Force Base main pharmacy, they call it now. This was the Scott Air Force Base Hospital. Pretty big hospital, really. And they used to bring a lot of people in here from, my understanding was from Vietnam and so on. They'd fly them in here on the C9s, and the first time I lived here in the 60s, they were flying these things in all the time. Anyway, same hospital, and another tie-in while I'm on the nostalgia trip here. When I was working for the Franklin Mobile Home Organization in East St. Louis, I had an accident there one time where a serrated piece of metal fell off the roof of a mobile home, and I was working down below, and I put up my hands to protect my head, and the serrated edge sawed through my work glove and about halfway through my right thumb, and I thought I was going to lose it. And the only hospital that I knew of, I didn't have any insurance, but I had been a civilian employee of the Air Force and still had a current pass. So I took a chance, and my boss drove me from East St. Louis to here. It wasn't really that far away. And sure enough, they did treat me here, did a little outpatient surgery and stitched me up. But so there's a tie-in there. Anyway, so you've got this whole expansion here, another housing area, and I don't know exactly where it is now, but somewhere along this they have another school they built. Here it is, Scott Elementary School. This is apparently the replacement for the derelict schools I just visited, now that the housing areas are down in this corner of the base. I expect that that's still run by the Mascoutah school system. Anyway, so then I was going to continue down here and pick up Highway 161, which is here. I don't think the camera's going to get the small text. Come over along here, and this used to be the south entrance to the base on Scott Drive. That's the north-south road here, and that's the same one that curves around here and goes up by the north gate where the air park is. So come down here, jot over to Scott Drive, and then this is Highway 161 coming in from the west. 161 jogs up here just a little bit and then continues along here, goes over and crosses the Silver Creek wooded area and south of Mid-America Airport. and then I was going to come down on North County Road right here, which is the way we always got to Mascoutah from the base, and then this comes down here to the town of Mascoutah. So that'll be the next thing, but I will stop at the little air park they've got there first. So while I'm coming down Wary Road here, I think I'm going to go down this Siebert Road or whatever it's called, and there's a heritage air park with just a few airplanes that was not here anytime I've been here before, and I just called base security and asked if it was accessible to civilians, and they said, yeah, come on by, just outside of the gate. So that's what I'm doing now. Yep, there it is on the left. See if I can zoom with one hand while still driving and paying attention to what I'm doing. Strip mall right here for convenience of people living in the housing areas on the north end of the base. So they have more grandiose plans for this place, but this is what they have at this time. So you've got a C-141 there. Used to have a lot of these operating out of Scott when I lived here, both times really, but primarily the first time. For a frame of reference from where I was when I was checking out my old schools, there in the distance is that water tower or whatever it is, and that's back kind of towards where Scott Lake is. There's a small man-made lake dammed up back in the woods, recreational area for people on the base, and the Wary housing area would have been kind of in that area. And back into this area they've built some other stuff back there, but I don't really know what. And so, you know, the schools would have been like back about there from where I'm standing now.
This is not an air museum you'd make a long trek to see, but it's still nice that they've done it. There used to be a main drag up and down through the main military part of the base on the west side of the runways. And it just sort of popped out on the north side and joined up with this road. I honestly don't remember there ever being a gate there, but back in those days you could just drive straight through. It was all long before 911 and so on, and people could just drive through the base pretty much. They had a little guard shack down at the south end, as I recall, but they pretty much just waved you through. Very different now. They've built up a large security gate area, visitor center and all that, or visitor access center really is what it would be. So this is a KC-135E Stratotanker, Boeing's first jet refueling craft, and essentially the same airplane as the 707 passenger liner. I think I've flown on one of these 2 times, maybe 3 times, to and from Japan when we were going to go live there, and I believe then a few years later moving to Europe. I think we took another one, but then coming back from Europe we flew on a DC-8, which was Douglas's answer to the 707. So they had these things operating in and out of Scott both times I lived here. And this was a little executive transport that the Air Force had, the C-21A. It was essentially a Learjet Model 35A multi-role business jet. And it was the basis for the C-21A. My father flew on these a few times when he'd be off on a trip. He was working with the Inspector General for a while, and a couple times he came back to Scott on one of these, I'm pretty sure. They had a couple other small executive transport jets too, and it's possible it might be one of the other ones. This is one bird, the Hercules, which I don't recall ever seeing at Scott when I was here, but they must have had him come through a few times. Well, I take that back. When they were having the competition for the STOL cargo plane that eventually turned into the C-17, sort of, Douglas and Boeing had prototype airplanes, and they were one of a kind, and I believe they're both down at the Pima Air and Space Museum in Tucson now. But it was the Boeing one that was here giving a demonstration, right? Took off from the taxiway next to the runway, and my dad called me and said, hey, they're going to be doing this. So I dropped what I was doing and hopped on my bicycle and tore over to the runway, and of course I could do that then, nobody stopped me. And we watched the thing doing some incredible maneuvers, short takeoffs and landings for a decent sized jet transport, although it wasn't as big as the Herc. It was still pretty impressive. And a similar situation occurred where I got a call from my father, and he said, hey, they're going to be doing a demonstration aerial dropping a couple of tanks and pallets. They had a short, the main Scott runway is, it's an angle, but it's more or less north and south. And then there was a short, stubby one that went crosswise, and I think it was mostly just used for the general aviation, and maybe some fighters or something could land there if they had to refuel. Don't really know, because it was too short for big transports. But they did have a C-130 Hercules come through and just swoop down low over that little runway and looked like it was going to land on it, and I was kind of horrified. And instead it disgorged a couple of pallets and a couple of vehicles strapped to pallets or something. They just kind of skidded out on parachutes and dropped a couple of feet to the ground, and they were down. I was kind of amazed that anything could sustain that kind of damage without just coming all apart, but that's what they were doing. And I'm pretty sure it was a C-130 that dropped those, so in that sense I saw a C-130 at Scott during my time here. And then of course the C-9, which was the military version of the Douglas DC-9 commercial aircraft, which was always one of my favorites to fly on. Hardly anybody seems to operate them anymore. But this was a version of that they just turned over as a military hospital ship, and it was called the C-9 Nightingale, after Florence Nightingale. So, modified DC-9, the only aircraft in the U.S. Air Force inventory at the time, specifically dedicated to the movement of litter and ambulatory patients. Now, one thing Scott had, and I think it still does, was a really large military hospital, bigger than most, and they were flying people back from war locations. You hear about people in Iraq or Iran during the recent military conflicts getting flown back to places like Frankfurt or Rhein-Main Air Force Base or something in Germany for treatment. And my recollection is that they were bringing people back from places like Vietnam, and a lot of them seem to be coming here, maybe just for temporary treatment before going on. I'm not really sure, but they had a lot of C-9s flying in and out of Scott. It was by far the most common airplane we saw operating during the first time I was here, and by the time I was here the second time, I'm not sure they were still using them. Too long ago, I can't remember if I saw any during that visit or not. Anyway, I was kind of curious about this little museum. I knew they had something here. 5 airplanes. Oh, I didn't stop at this one. So this is a C-140A Jetstar. Lockheed's business jet prototype became the basis for the C-140 Jetstar. So yet another small kind of executive transport plane, bigger than the other one, the Learjet. This one had 4 engines, 2 on each side of the tail. I probably saw some of these, but I just have no recollection of it. Now this is interesting. You can see here where the aircraft is painted up by the vertical stabilizer, but then it has this, looks like stainless steel or something, friction plate. And the horizontal stabilizer, which on jets is usually something that can be tilted up and down, in addition to the elevator action. You'll see that on most jet transports anyway, and commercial jets, but here it looks like they tilt the entire vertical stabilizer, and with that comes the horizontal stabilizer. I'd not seen that approach before. I wonder if that's unique. It's Lockheed, right? Always doing something different. A lot of buildings back there at Scott that I don't recognize. Since all the housing areas at Scott are over on the west side of the runways now, that school there is almost certainly the replacement for the ones that were derelict on the other side of the base. So now we're down at the extreme southwest corner of the base, getting ready to intersect with Illinois Highway 161. I went to college for a while, several miles, 10 miles or something in that direction. It's changed its name, but it's something like Southwestern Illinois or Western Illinois or Southern Illinois University or something now. And I used to ride my bicycle down this highway because I did not yet have a car. Then I got my very first car, my Oldsmobile F85, I think it was, 1965. I had the station wagon version. So now I'm on 161 heading west. And it just goes down here a little ways and then makes a jog and then continues west. Just like today, about 95 degrees and quite humid down here. It always was in southern Illinois. Biking down this highway on that shoulder was not my idea of fun. Yeah, so here's the jog. Now I believe this would be the main gate of Scott Air Force Base up here, right ahead, just after the jog in the highway. And that's where the smallish gate was back in my day. And now they've got all the barricades and things that you can't just ram through there, which is to be expected, but back in those days it was just a little guard shack alongside the road. None of this housing area over here existed. So if I was to proceed ahead here, I'd better be ready to show some military ID. Somewhere down here, I'm not sure exactly where anymore, should be a small road that goes into the base. People used to use that if they lived or worked on the east side of the runway, but obviously they have a lot more base housing here now behind this fence. There's just tons of housing here. I had heard at one point that they were going to close Scott, but then they reversed the decision and decided to develop it and station a lot more people here. I believe this is the road right here. It goes into a housing area now, or maybe not. Maybe that's a new road. Maybe it's this road up here. Everything looks very different. It's still a big housing area. Looks like 2 families per building. Yeah, this is the Scott Air Force Base south entrance here. And this is the way we used to just sneak in and out. Sort of, it was not a gated entrance. You just went in on this little road. And it went in right at the very south end of the runway. Now you see a control tower way in the distance there. That is, I believe it's the joint control tower for the double airport, because now the west side of the complex is Scott Air Force Base, and the east side, or the right side from this perspective, is Mid-America Airport, which was not here at the time. It was just woods. And when I was here the first time, I was in the Scouts, and we used to go camping back in these woods and get terribly mosquito bit. Here's Silver Creek. Used to go fishing in that a lot when I was a kid, but just down there in the trees, always just a shallow, muddy little creek, but it was the only place that was easily accessible to me. I didn't need to ask my parents' permission or anything to go there. Let's see, I think this is the one I want. County Road into the town of Mascoutah. They changed the entrance. It used to come straight through, but somebody has a big house or something there now. So they rerouted the end of this road for some reason. I can see where it used to go. Right down there. But when we went into Mascoutah from the base, this is the road we took. It's just identified on the GPS as North County Road, which doesn't sound terribly descriptive. That little hump in the road we just went over, my mother used to enjoy taking our family car over that road at pretty good clip, because there was just like nobody on it. Now there's these houses and things here, and in those days it was just a county road through cornfields and nothing on either side, no driveways or anything. And she used to open up the car and fly over that hill, and the car would kind of almost go airborne. And she did it because we kids thought that was a scream. Of course, nobody in those days wore seat belts or anything, and the cars weren't very crash suppressant or safe, really. And you know, I've reminded her of that a few times, and she would say, "Oh, I never did that," but she definitely did. This is the road she did it on. So now we're into the town of Mascoutah, which is really just separated by the Silver Creek and its wooded boundaries from Scott Air Force Base. But again, this has expanded dramatically. The town didn't used to come out this far from the main drag. Not really sure why people live here, because it's really a tiny little town, but I don't know if it's still the case, but back when we lived here when I was a kid, the Mascoutah school system provided all the schools for the military dependents, all the military personnel's children, and so they got a lot of tax money to them, so they had some of the best schools in the state right here in this tiny little town of Mascoutah. And you know, first-rate facilities, excellent teachers, no shortage of money. A lot of my viewers on YouTube, for example, know that I do a lot of music, and I always attributed it to the musical start I got in this town, because this is my most formative years of music, when I was in the school system of this town. Now this is the high school here. I did not go here but when I was in high school we were living in Germany.
But when we came back from Germany, one of my sisters went there. This is the main drag here, Main Street. My first planned stop is to, while I'm on the subject of visiting old schools, to go down here to the junior high school that I did attend for 1 year, immediately before we moved to Europe. I may still know a couple people who live in this town, but I don't know where they live anymore, and I don't have the time to be looking them up and visiting, so I'm just going to pretend like I don't know anybody here. And they may have moved away too, or, you know, anything. Doesn't seem to have changed a whole lot here. Now this is 6th Street here. Couldn't seem to get my tongue out of my mouth. So 6th Street rings a bell, because when I was renting a basement apartment here while going to college, it was right down in this part of town, but I don't remember the address anymore. So I don't know exactly which street it was on, but that intersection with the light, I know we used to go through that intersection when we were leaving the area. And there used to be a train track that went along the south end of town, so all the streets stopped at the tracks. Now the tracks aren't there anymore. Instead there's a rails to trails conversion that's just down here a little ways, and that sort of defines the south end of the town. But this is clearly not the street I was on, because this is industrial, but it does ring a bell that I remember there was an industrial area just a block or two from where we used to live, or where I used to live. So, was it 5th Street? Could be, but there's a good chance it was Salem Drive too, which is the only other choice here. I think I'll either recognize the house or I won't. Well, it was definitely not either of these. It was just a little ranch house. And definitely not that one, not that one. The garage was on the left side when viewed from the street. It's not at any of these. I bet it's on the next street. So, 5th Street. Let's see if this makes any sense. It would have been on that side of the street. So I'm looking for a ranch house with a garage on the far side of it. It could have been this one. Could well have been this one. Definitely not that one. Was it a
Tri-level, I do not believe that it was. That is like, that's the only possibility in this whole area that it could be that one house. So I'm gonna make a U-ey, go back and take a picture of it and see the people who used to live there that I rented from moved out to Denver, Colorado, and then he died and she moved to Greeley, Colorado, where she's still around. I might send her the picture and say, hey, is this the place? So it's not that one. Yeah, if it's any of these houses, it's got to be this one. But they wouldn't have had that ramp there. But otherwise, it's about the right place and the right look. I don't remember having that brick siding, but that looked like a faux brick siding to me, not a real brick siding. I'm positive that that was the one now, because it is the only house that could have been the right one. It seems like it's in the right area. I think the thing that threw me off is that somebody's modified the house. They've changed the siding. I mean, that would have been over 40 years ago that I lived there, so they would have done something with the siding by now. And the fact that at that time it was a new development, and there were no mature trees there, and now there are, which really makes it look different. But I'm confident that was the place. So now we're getting into downtown Mascoutah. And this doesn't look that different. Old building there goes way back. This used to be a Ben Franklin's right there, and I used to go in there a lot when I was a kid. We had business in this part of town because our church was right here, and that, in fact, that building right there was the parsonage where the pastor lived. It belonged to the church, probably still is. Now, there was an old-fashioned church with a steeple and everything, and it was really just right here. It fit between that house there and the corner of the street, and it went directly from the sidewalk here to maybe about here. It was not a big church. And across the street was the school building that the church owned, and that was where they had religious classes, and there was a gymnasium, and they'd have, you know, church sports events and things. But I've known that they had long ago razed that church. It was condemned as structurally unsound. So they just took the school building and then added a new modern addition on, really, for a new the new sanctuary of the church is the word I was looking for. But that old building here, old feedlot, is still there. It's amazing to me. I don't know what all the police cars are doing there. I think that building would have been torn down a long time ago. Ace Hardware. This used to be, I think, a True Value hardware store when I was here, but it's definitely a hardware store in that location. I still have a nice set of socket wrenches that I bought there. I don't want to tarry here too much. Just this brief pass through the town. But just over here towards the eastern side of town was a set of older houses like this right on the street. And I think this is the one right here, actually. I'm not absolutely positive, but it may well have been. It was like right along here. It could have been this one too. I just don't know for sure which one it was anymore. It wasn't that one, but anyway, it was a house that our church pastor had bought as an investment, and he was going to fix it up in his spare time, and I helped him rewire it. It was the first electrical work I ever did for hire for anybody. In that sense, it's important to my past. But I told myself I was going to fuel up here before starting to head back to the Chicago area, and there's a gas station just back here. I only have 2 other stops in this town, and that's the old junior high school and the other church that I used to go to see if it's still even there. Okay, this place here was the grade school, which I did not go to, nor did anybody I know. But it was Mascoutah's own grade school, whereas the junior high here was shared by Mascoutah and the Air Force Base, as I mentioned earlier. Now this parking lot here was added shortly before we moved to Europe, and this is, you know, like a whole new wing added on here that didn't exist at that time. I still don't really know if any of the military or the kids from the base get bussed out here like they used to. I suspect really though that since Scott is a much bigger base now, that it probably has at least the grade schools on base. Maybe the high school is... And the high school here seems to be thriving. When we drove past, it looked big. It looked newly built, renovated, added onto, or something. More than a little town like this could justify. And there's the pool. That was always the pool. But we didn't usually use it because the base had a pool. So this is the old junior high school here. Apparently it's still the junior high school. This was the gymnasium there, which also was the auditorium. It doesn't seem to have changed at all. However, that cornfield over there used to be the athletic field. We had a running track, and you know, they didn't really play football, but they had a running track with a sports field in the middle of it. And this being the gymnasium, the locker rooms were on the far end of it. And we'd just come running out the side there and go out into the fields to run the track or what have you. And this here is a special place to me because this is the band room right here. And then this area behind where it says Mascoutah Middle School was the storage room for the band room. And I guess I should stop here and go and look through the window. See if it's still a band room. There's some drums in it. I can just make out. But it looks very barren. And the rest of it's closed with blinds. Anyway, that was my first experience playing an instrument besides the piano, which my mother taught me. And the system here was excellent, as I mentioned before, in regards to the school system and their facilities and resources. It was all very modern and well funded and so on, and they had a great band here for a junior high school band. I still hear a lot of bands, and the junior high school band here was darn close to a high school band. It was really good. Now they've got a lot of stuff moved around here. There's a whole bunch of chairs out in the lobby of the high school. I can see through the window. That would have been, I think they may just have stuff moved in there while they're doing construction or maintenance. But and these very first windows here were the principal's office, and then the rest of the way down here, school had only two wings that I remember. This one and another one just behind it with a courtyard in between. And classes I had were all along here on this side, and a couple on the other side, and then one or two on the other wing. This down here was added on later, this part. But the rest of it's old, but in very good condition. So I don't think I'm gonna get much more from that. Okay, so this is one of the main drags north and south out of town. I came in on the westmost one, and this one here is certainly a north-south highway, but it's not a major state highway or anything. Still a lot of traffic going north and south here. Now, way out here somewhere, I don't recall exactly where. I think this is it coming up. Yeah, this is the place. I was kind of hoping there'd be some cars here. You know, that somebody would be working here today or something, but this is St. Martin of Tours, Lutheran Church, ELCA. Anyway, when I came back from Europe, there'd been a big schism in the Lutheran Church, and that other church that I showed earlier, which was, I think, Zion Lutheran Church, had gone the other way, and the synod that my family belonged to built this new church, this tiny little church over here. Oop. Almost went by it. Will it focus? Yeah. 1979. Just about right. That's when it was built. And it only happened just long enough for me to go there very briefly after it opened before I moved to the Chicago area. So that is it for Mascoutah. Time to stop reminiscing and get out of Dodge. Long drive home. Yeah, so this is the north end of that street, hitting 161 again. And if you go ahead, it's a closed road. It just turns into somebody's driveway or something. It's also possible that it might be an access road to Mid-America Airport.
Continue 0.7 miles, then turn left on Illinois 4.
I was mentioning Mid-American Airport before. It basically added another parallel runway to the Scott Air Force Base runway and designated that primarily for civilian use, while the west one was primarily for Air Force use.
0.4 miles, turn left on Illinois 4.
But there was a long taxiway that went through the woods and over that Silver Creek I pointed out earlier, and crossed over to the other side, so planes could
turn
taxi.
left on Illinois 4.
Planes could taxi back and forth between the two runways, so you could have civilian or military aircraft on either runway. And they had one combination control tower that would serve both. And I honestly don't know how people get to that airport, but it might be off of this Highway 4.
Continue 28 miles on Illinois 4.
I don't know, the control tower seems a long way away. Maybe it's not this far over. I have zero interest in exploring that. Anyway, but Mid-America Airport has virtually no flights in and out of it. It was supposed to be like a relief airport or a convenience airport for the Lambert Field at St. Louis, and you know, they figured if they built it, people would come, but nobody came. And they have this very modern airport terminal there, a small one, grant you, but still, you know, it's set up to take large jet aircraft. I think for a while some small airlines tried using it and they had just a few flights, but I'm not really sure what they have now. It's little or nothing. Certainly all the time I was hanging around there, I saw no planes take off or land from. I mean, all the time I've been here today, there's been like no airplanes, no military transports coming in and out. Yeah, here it is, Mid-America Airport. Well, there's a bunch of cars parked out there. Good grief. I don't even know if that's in focus, but that's where the terminal is, and it's just south of I-64. Here's the interchange for that, so it should have been really pretty easy to get in and out of, but apparently nobody wanted to use it enough for airlines to think it was worthwhile flying in and out.
I-64, everybody. If you go that way on it, you get to St. Louis. And now there's just half an hour or so of driving on a small state highway here to get up to I-55, which is what takes me home. Historic Lebanon on Highway 4. When I was a kid, this is the nearest Dairy Queen. So we trekked out on the country roads north of the base by these grain silos, and there was a Dairy Queen there, and amazingly, Dairy Queens never seem to go away. Still a Dairy Queen there. Don't know if it's the same building, but it's in the same place. That brings back some additional memories. I'd forgotten all about that until I came through here and saw it.